ask you this. So this war is, I think, correctly perceived as being dangerous, unnecessary, and almost counter to U.S. interests. But I'd like you, if you can, to play, I guess, devil's advocate, or to say it differently, put yourself in the shoes of whoever is behind this from the United States' perspective, the instigation of this war to try and destabilize Russia. Is there any way to look at this war as actually being in the interests of the American people?
No. There's no way you can spin this war to be in the interest of the American, because we failed at everything we wanted to achieve. I mean, in theory, when we were starting to do this, the theory was that we would keep Russia down, that we would never allow Russia to stand on its own 2 feet, that we would have a Russia return to the era of the 90s. We wanted a Yeltsin 2.0. We don't want Putin. In theory, if we could have successfully implemented what we wanted, we would have had a weak Russia, et cetera. And then you could, in theory, say that it was better for the United States, although I think it's unrealistic given the fact that Russia's a nuclear power and it could have precipitated a nuclear conflict. It's sort of stupid thinking to talk about bringing Russia down. We lost our greatest asset when it came to managing Russia, and that was the interwoven character of the Russian economy and the Western economy that had developed from the 90s and continued up until 2022. Fully 30% of Russia was tightly interwoven with the Western economy, and that gave the West tremendous leverage over Russian politics, et cetera. Putin had to engage in certain policies because he couldn't alienate the West. The West was a reality. The oligarchs continued to leech on to Russia because of this relationship. It weakened the Russian economy. So if I'm an American that wants Russia weak, the last thing I would do is sanction Russia. What I would do is encourage more Western trade with Russia to further dilute, Russia's economic unity, to further ingratiate Russia in with the West. And yet we did the exact opposite. We sanctioned them, and then we froze all the assets of the oligarchs, destroying their viability, and we compelled Russia to go through shock therapy to restructure its economy so that there's no interwoven nature with the West. We've lost all leverage. We have no way to leverage ourselves on the Russian economy today. Sanctions have failed. The more we sanction them, the stronger Russia gets. We failed there. And the same thing, if we had ever been mature about allowing Russia to develop as a democratic nation, the best thing we could have done was maintain massive indirect influence on the Russian economy, which translates into influence on the political establishment that runs the Russian economy. And so, rather than trying to force the issue by recruiting a Navalny and trying to insert them in there, what you do is you just let the Russians create their own Navalny. No outside interference. Let it create their own, because there was enough corruption in Russia that Navalny could have been created naturally. And now you have a viable opposition, and now you can begin the process of divide and conquer politically, not because you're directed, because it's going to happen, because you've set a condition through the economic engagement with Russia. This is what a smart CIA guy would have done, the indirect approach. But we can't do that. We don't have the patience for it. We don't have the vision. We have to be in control, manage everything. And as a result, we overplayed our hand. And today, Russia has been freed of all the potential points of leverage that the United States could have had over its economic, social, and political development. Russia now is truly an independent, sovereign state, self-sufficient, stronger than it's ever been. And, in a way, I view that as a good thing. I always believe that it's best that we deal with a nation that's living up to its full potential, because then it's an honest relationship based upon genuine capabilities. I don't like the idea of the United States exploiting a weaker nation to try and manipulate outcomes. I think that's bad policy. So I like a stronger Russia.
Here's why I ask that question. Russia obviously has, if not the most, they have the second most amount of natural resources on Earth. They are on the eastern flank of Europe. They're not sandwiched between other competitive, highly developed Western European nations. And so while they have a large western border, they do have the luxury to, they're not Poland sandwiched between Germany and Russia in World War II. And so they have a tremendous amount of resources. And the way I view, if I were to look at it from the U.S.'s perspective, let's say, the way I view it is that the Russians, by virtue of their existence as a unified state with the most amount of resources, they have the biggest bones to grow into. And so if the U.S. didn't instigate this conflict and sever the relationship economically between Russia and Western Europe, then they may have allowed Russia, not because they're not a threat today, but maybe in 50 years, if left alone, continuing to do business with Germany, Nord Stream 1, Nord Stream 2, getting economic investment from Germany that perhaps in 50 years, then they could really challenge U.S. power in Western Europe. So from that perspective, does that make sense to you as maybe trying to stiff arm them well in advance, even though they should be maybe more focused on China, who's a closer peer competitor? But do you understand what I'm saying? Russia's ability to grow into the natural abilities they have as a unified state.
Well, that was the whole purpose of the American policy was to prevent that from happening. Our goal was to weaken Russia, keep Russia weak, to divide Russia, to have Russia break up into several constituent parts. Neither one by themselves could represent a threat to the United States, and we wanted to keep them from, consolidating this potential under a single entity. So we failed. We got the exact opposite of strong Russia. But there's a couple problems with the scenario you put out. One, it presupposes that America has a right to be an unmatched, unsurpassed power, and that sustaining that is an obligation. If that's the case, then we'll be in perpetual conflict with the entire world. And the other one, it suggests that America is unable to compete on equal terms with the world. That in order for us to be competitive, we have to game the system. And that shows that we're the weak party. I think the problem is that the United States lacks the imagination at this point in time to envision a world where we are equal to other powers. Whenever America closes its eyes and imagines the world that we want to live in, it's always America on the top, America calling the shots. Those days are over. We ain't the shot callers anymore. What we need to do now is work to a world where nobody's the shot caller. And the Russians and the Chinese at this point in time appear to be satisfied with that. They're talking about a multipolar world where, the rights of all nations are considered. Now, you hypothesize what happens in 50 years when Russia grows into its capabilities. But why is Russia the only nation growing? Imagine how strong and competitive the United States would be if we stopped posturing militarily and we started posturing economically. Imagine if we diverted 1/10 of our military budget into the State Department so that we had more meaningful engagement, diplomatic engagement with the world. Imagine if we worked with the Africans the way the Russians work with the Africans, without any preconditions, without trying to impose a moral agenda, where we were just looking for a mutually beneficial relationship. I think we could find that America is a natural fit to many places in the world. We could outcompete both China and Russia if we dropped the you must do it the American way attitude. China comes in just as a straight up business deal. Russia's doing the same thing. Why can't we? Why do we always have to bring in, entire annexes of preconditions based upon, American, social values. Why do we insist that, nations buy into diversity if they're going to do business with us? Russians ain't putting a diversity clause in their contract. China's not putting a diversity clause in their contract, but we do. We have these preconditions. If America learns to compete properly, Russia won't be the only one growing. We'll be growing too. And I think what you'll find is that the nations will grow to where they naturally should be. And at that point in time, we now have defined what a multipolar world looks like. And then we can get around restructuring things like the United Nations, the Security Council composition, based upon this new reality. Once we let nations shake out to where they should be, we'll probably find that neither France nor England belong on the Security Council. They're pathetically small European nations. Why aren't we letting India in, Brazil, South Africa? I think the world's going to reimagine itself going forward. But if we play our cards right, the one of the parts of this reimagination is a strong and prosperous America that is competing as equals with a strong and prosperous Russia, a strong and prosperous China, a strong and prosperous Europe.
This video is sponsored by you. That's because we don't have any sponsors. All we have are supporters like yourself. So please consider making a contribution to our channel. You can give to us via the Buy Me a Coffee link in the description of this video. That way, we can continue to fly guests like Scott Ritter to our studio for an insightful podcast from which we can all benefit, like the one you're watching right now. So please consider making a contribution. Thank you for your support.
Trust nothing. No